correspondences. And it occurred to me, has anybody actually seriously interpreted those hard-to-interpret remarks or tried to interpret them as ethical statements?
I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what you mean by correspondences.
Never mind, my history is off. I just vaguely remember there was a period where a connection like that, as absurd as it sounds today, would actually possibly have been drawn.
Correspondences between the obscure tenets and ethical. Like someone made this argument back in the day.
Well, between very specific body parts and very specific.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Or very specific astrological things. Very specific.
I see.
Sort of
I'm really not sure. My medieval history is a little rough too.
Okay.
I know that I mean, we definitely saved a lot of those works by the skin of their teeth. But I couldn't really comment on when one idea or one interpretation went from one place to another. I mean, basic answers, I just really don't know the answer to your question. Any others?
I have a question.
Certainly.
All right, so at the end of my class on Aristophanes, the teacher was teaching it for the first time, who's also done it in the hall, was like, you know what? I think that based on the people who Aristophanes doesn't make fun of, or kind of presents as pretty okay people, that he was in fact an oligarch. So it sounds like
Aristophanes was an
Oh yeah.
Okay.
This is the claim that he's making. So it seems like there are people in his democracy who are fundamentally unhappy with it. Was that
definitely?
strong?
Oh yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question. That's a good question. Plato was born into an aristocratic family. I don't know if we would call his uncles. Yeah, we would probably call. I mean, Plato was very proud of his lineage. His mother's family was thought to be descended from Solon, which is the ancient lawgiver of Athens. He had relatives. One of them was Critias, who appears in some of the dialogues. Critias was one of the 30 tyrants who Sparta had installed as a puppet regime in Athens after the war. Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to stretch the analogy too far, but you can think of the political situation in Plato's Athens as being something like the political situation of lords and aristocrats in England in the 19th century. They are still considered noble, they still have some money, they're still considered to be first families, but they're losing their political power to an ever-rising democracy. And Plato is definitely one of these people. It is thought that if he hadn't met Socrates, or that before he met Socrates, he had been setting himself up for a political career. And it would definitely have been the kind of political career that was just fundamentally dissatisfied with the democracy. So if your question is, are Plato's philosophical and political claims influenced by things that he was just really upset with in the city that he lived in? Absolutely. I mean, the foremost example would definitely be the Peloponnesian War, where you read Thucydides' account of the Peloponnesian War, and okay, it's a democracy, so we're all gonna, we're gonna vote on war policy. Should we send our ships to Sicily? Should we keep our ships here? This is just a ridiculous.
Don't send the ships.
Yeah, I know. This is a ridiculous way to conduct foreign policy. This is a ridiculous way to run a war. Athens was the leading city. It was commanded this huge empire, and a couple, bad votes in the assembly, and the whole thing comes collapsing down. That's a really damning critique of democracy, is certainly that historical perspective. And absolutely, Socrates fought in the Peloponnesian War as well, and they would both, I think, have been strongly influenced by the fact that it seems that democracy, as embodied in Athens and its Delian League allies, just didn't seem like it was able to stand up to Sparta, whose actual government we don't know that much about, but there are a lot of people, Bertrand Russell actually, who thinks that Sparta really influences the political system that is put forward in the Republic. It's very militaristic, you've got the warriors. I mean, it's what we might fairly call a timocracy, the kind of government that's governed by spirit, the second best one that Plato says in the Republic. So yeah, I definitely think, and that would be aristocrats ruling, and that would be, now we're going back to Karl Popper, who says that the Republic is, Plato's own claim for political power, which may be stretching it a little too far, but definitely there are Plato's whole family and the people he associated with really didn't like the democracy. He was friends with Alcibiades, who betrayed Athens multiple times. It was, Plato's not a fan of the democracy, in Athens or in theory. Any more questions? Andrew.
So he definitely addresses the warriors check the appetites of the workers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does he address the fact that warriors and rulers generally have appetites in reality? Do they check their own appetites?
Yes.
Or
That's a very good question. I'm glad you asked that. The appetite is the part of soul that's dominant in the workers. So it's, in point of fact, you end up having to check worker appetites often. But it is true, you have to give these two classes a very careful education to make sure that their own appetites don't get out of hand. I mean, who guards the guardians? They have to guard themselves. And so, absolutely, they have to check their own appetites too. Now, appetite isn't the dominant part of soul in their individual makeup, so it shouldn't be as much of a struggle. And the education that we give them from a very young age should make this quite possible for them. But absolutely, this is why these two classes are not allowed to have private property in the Republic. That they're not even allowed to handle gold and silver. It's just they cannot have it. That has to be completely not part of their lives. It is crucial to the success of the government. Their appetites specifically not be dominant. In fact, the worst government, the tyranny, is the one where the ruler is completely dominated by appetite. And that's the worst kind of government. So you have to be really careful that the appetites of the rulers are in check. Any further questions?
One just quick question. The rulers direct the warriors, but do they end up having to check them the way the warriors have to check the workers?
The rulers are actually drawn when Socrates is first establishing the city. It's just the guardians are protecting the regular citizens, and then as the argument moves along, we actually need to pick out some of the guardians to be hyper-rational people who understand the theory of government. And so actually the rulers are actually drawn from the most elite ranks of the warriors. Do they have to check the warriors? I would say that they have to give orders to the warriors, that spirit is the dominant part in their soul. So they definitely need someone else supplying the reason, but the thought should be that there's a kind of natural alliance, that spirit wants to enforce the dictates of reason. So the rulers have to tell the warriors what to do, but once that happens, the warriors are supposed to just
So spirits automatically recognize reason. Spirit automatically recognizes reason.
I wouldn't say automatically, but I would say natural affinity. I would say that you do have democracies that are governed by spirit to the detriment of reason. I mean, you don't want the desire for victory, the desire for glory, the desire for pushing your enemies back, such to the extent that you're not even doing the rational thing. You're not even retreating when you should retreat, or
Spartans.
Exactly. So I wouldn't say they're not one thing. They're two things, but usually it's seen as these two have to ally to defeat this. So I would say it's more like these two usually go together. Any further questions? All right. Well, I'm done.